Sorry for the random quality dips, my mic wasn't working sometimes.
In this video, I'll be applying Russian theorist Vsevolod Pudovkin's theory on editing to the 1928 film classic, The Passion of Joan of Arc. First, a little history on Pudovkin. Vsevolod Pudovkin was a Soviet-era film director and theorist who had a large impact on the way the world viewed the early stages of cinema. To give a brief history of the man, he saw active duty during World War I and was a prisoner of war. After the war, he gained a larger interest in film and became a screenwriter, actor, director, and worked with his teacher, legendary Russian filmmaker and theorist Lev Kuleshov. Pudovkin is claimed to be the co-creator of the Kuleshov effect. The Kuleshov effect being a psychological phenomenon where the viewers of a film gain meaning from two separate shots juxtaposed together, as opposed to a single shot. Pudovkin's theories had a large focus on editing, or montage. Most likely, everyone who's film literate knows the concept of editing, constructing shots and scenes together. Editors are the construction workers of film. Editing can serve a multitude of different purposes, but at its core, it synthesizes. In his essay on editing, Pudovkin highlights the importance of specifically relational editing, or creating meaning by juxtaposing two different shots together. Pudovkin covers 5 separate relational editing techniques: contrast, parallelism, symbolism, simultaneity, and leitmotifs. First described is contrast editing. This is where two different shots are juxtaposed together in a way that highlights their differences. The two shots are supposed to be thematically or narratively opposites. Take, for example, this bright red apple. It would be juxtaposed with this bleak, dying graveyard to symbolize life versus death. The next described editing technique is parallelism. Parallel editing serves to connect otherwise unrelated shots through a common narrative or theme. Pudovkin gives the example of a high-stress scenario where a man's execution time has been set. As the other scenes in the film occur, we continue to cut back to a clock in the scene, and time continues to progress forward. The scenes are otherwise unconnected. Next is symbolism. Essentially, it's the use of metaphorical scenes to portray the content or emotion of a scene in the narrative. This would be something like a beautiful flower blooming as love blossoms in a relationship. Then there's simultaneity. Simultaneous editing is cutting between two different events that are happening at the same time. These quick back and forth cuts inherently create tension in the film. He ends his essay with discussion of leitmotifs. Much like a motif in any creative work, a leitmotif in film is the repetition of a subject to reinforce an idea. Pudovkin calls it a reiteration of theme. Now that that's been covered, the film I will be applying these 5 techniques to is Carl Theodor Dreyer's 1928 classic, The Passion of Joan of Arc. The lack of audio in this film puts even more emphasis on its editing. The film relies purely on visuals in order to portray its message. And I was able to locate 4 of the 5 techniques within the film. The main form of contrast in the film is the juxtaposition of Joan's crying face with the stone, rigid faces of the clergymen. This contrast isolates Joan, enhancing the emotional impact of her persecution. When searching for parallel editing in the film, I wasn't really able to find any. Due to the nature of the film, each shot is stuck in one location for a majority of the time. There are a few instances of symbolic editing in the film. For one, we see birds flying overhead during Joan's execution. I've come up with 3 potential meanings of the birds as a symbol. For one, it could simply mean Joan is going to be free from this mortal coil and fly. Second, it could be that the support of Joan is spreading like wildfire and flying away across the nation. Or third, the birds represent angels watching Joan as they perch on the cross and watch the execution. Symbolic editing is not always clear, but some may view that as a good thing. Audience engagement is key for artistic filmmaking. The next piece of symbolism, and definitely the most famous, Joan wearing the crown of thorns. The crown, of course, being akin to the one Jesus wore in the Bible. The clergymen mock her, forcing her to wear the crown, jokingly referring to her as Jesus. To a truly devout Christian, this is blasphemy, and Jane, as the most devout, is appalled. A less subtle symbol would be the skull being buried in the dirt, showing Joan's fear of death. Simultaneity. There is a case earlier in the film of simultaneous editing. In this scene, the soldiers are all marching out of the room and the clergymen are reacting. Such a simple premise can be made much more tense simply by using simultaneous editing. The quick cuts back and forth from the soldiers to the reactions show not only their tension, but elicit tension from the audience. Finally, let's look for some leitmotifs. A more obvious leitmotif would be the appearance of the cross in multiple scenes in the film. The film is wholly religious, focusing entirely on Joan's faith to God. The looming crosses serve as reminders to both Joan and the audience. Whether or not you're faithful, the church and God are always watching. Joan's own crying face would be considered a leitmotif, as is prevalent through the film. We are forced to keep watching as this poor woman cries and cries and cries, and none of the clergymen show even a little bit of mercy towards her. While the constant reminder of her tears can seem a little repetitive, Dreyer is not trying to entertain the audience. He wants them to feel uncomfortable. He wants them to share Joan's pain.
Well, that's all four.
Now, you may notice that certain editing techniques can be confused or even conjunctive with others, and this is intentional on Pudovkin's part. These are not hard set rules. As Pudovkin concludes in his essay, the constant creation of film will undoubtedly lead to the discovery of new possibilities, and in conjunction with them, the creation of new forms. He was on point. As technology progresses and humans learn more and more about film and the world around them, there's a plethora of new possibilities as far as editing and filmmaking. Take CGI, for example.
At first laughed at for its low quality, it's become a part of everyday film use.
Pudovkin and his cohorts were very early in the lifespan of cinema, and so was the passion of Joan of Arc. Computers didn't even exist in Dreyer's time. They worked with what they had, and the passion of Joan of Arc innovated with his combination of unorthodox and traditional film editing techniques.
And whether Dreyer realized it or not, he followed multiple of Pudovkin's relational editing techniques. The Passion of Joan of Arc remains a highly regarded piece of film and is studied for a reason.